And I realized that I was just beyond bone tired, fatigued, and I needed sustenance. And so I began a January 1st, 2021 practice of looking for beauty for just a moment every single day. And that became incredibly sustaining and reminded me of the research around the character strength that is available to us, to the capacity to savor beauty and be inspired by it.
Hey there, Lyssa deHart here, and welcome to the Coaching Studio, the podcast that dives deep with the brightest minds in coaching, psychology, organizational leadership, and the art of working with people. You'll hear intimate, thought-provoking conversations alongside rising and established voices shaping the future of human development. Expect real stories, bold ideas, and practical insights you can use to expand your coaching and leadership impact. Whether you're a coach, therapist, leader, or lifelong learner, you'll leave each episode with new insights and renewed inspiration. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the studio. For each of us, there are moments in life when it feels overwhelming, when suffering, loss, uncertainty seem to strip us of direction. But what if those moments could become the fertile ground for resilience, growth, wisdom, and even beauty? My guest today, Dr. Maria Sirois, has spent more than 3 decades helping people cultivate resilience and grounded optimism in the face of challenges. With a rare blend of science, story, and compassion, she illuminates what it means to lead ourselves and others with hope. In her newest book, The Generous Exchange, it is a powerful invitation to notice what uplifts us and to find renewal through appreciation and to become active participants in restoring both our lives and the world around us. So, who is Maria Sirois, and what does she have to teach us about resilience, leadership, and living with optimism in difficult times? Let's get into it. Maria, I am so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, and that was just a beautiful and powerful introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. You've earned it completely. So I would love to get a sense of like, who is the Maria that began this journey to who you have become? Where did she begin?
Um, Boy, what a question. What a rich question. I often pivot back to my last year in graduate school when I was working in a pediatric oncology ward and supporting the children in their through their life-threatening diagnoses and their families. And I was stunned to witness families actually become stronger as a system. I expected families to fall apart, certainly, and I expected some families, because most pediatric cancers are curable, I expected some families to sort of take it in stride. That was an expression right back in the late 80s. But just blown away by watching over time a family become clearer and stronger and more loving and more generous, even as their child was dying. So this focus on resilience really started back then.
That's it's striking to me. It's reminding me of an element of my own life. When I was 12, we had a family friend, a very close family friend, and she died of cancer at 19. But I observed this, I was part of this experience of her end of life. And I'll be honest with you, as you talk about that, I think about my own response to life in some ways. And I've never lived with this sort of idea of, oh, you'll just take it for granted, you'll just live forever. And I think, it kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about from my lived experience of at 12, I had a very clear understanding that life was precious and that I wasn't granted forever. And to watch the way that she went through her end of life also with such courage and grace,
Mm.
it also was just a really powerful reminder to me about who I wanted to be as a human being. So I didn't know that you were going to share that, but it definitely resonates deeply with me. And I now have some even more gratitude for the fact that I had that experience. It is striking, though, how something that seems so catastrophic can actually lead to something really powerful for the person who is experiencing it, aside the person who's going through the actual, in this case, diagnosis.
Yes, and any major abruption, right? A diagnosis, an actual loss of a job, loss of a home, loss of a limb, major shifts in one's work environment, in one's economic security. Any kind of an abruption creates both that crisis moment and that opportunity. And death, in some ways, is a profound opportunity to pivot toward either that which sustains us or to sort of shrink and try and defend and protect oneself against any further assault, which we know as adults is not possible. There's life will have its way with us. Um, but there's a beautiful science now that articulates what happens to the families like the one you witnessed and the ones I witnessed at the Farber, which is a science of psychology called post-traumatic growth, which points to our capacity, our incredible capacity to grow through adversity.
Could you talk more a little bit about the science of this growth, post-traumatic growth? I think because we've all heard so much about post-traumatic, trauma, but I think we forget that there's a lot of possibility for us to move forward with grace and hope and all of that. I'd love to hear more about what the research is saying.
In the last 3 decades, researchers in the field of psychology have turned their attention to answering a sort of general question, who are we at our best in the worst moments? And it turns out when you focus the lens of your attention in that direction, we notice over and over again in the worst moments that some people grow. It doesn't happen immediately, and we're often shattered at first. And you can have post traumatic stress disorder and then experience post traumatic growth. But over time, and with help, and with an awareness, like your awareness of the preciousness of life, and of the fact that irrespective of what life sends us, there are choices we can make. Um, with that awareness, we can build within ourselves or strengthen within ourselves our innate capacity to move forward anyway. Right? I think of the losses in my life as sort of woven now into the fabric of my heart. The heart is all sewn and patched together, and I'm still breathing, and I'm still showing up for work, and I'm still loving. So that move forward anyway is the move of post traumatic growth. The science has emerged beautifully in studies over the last 3 decades. Richard Tedeschi at the University of North Carolina, Tal Ben-Shahara's work on happiness, George Bonanno's work at Columbia on resilience, to point toward the understanding that when the worst things happen, there are certain moves that resilient people make. And if we make those moves, we have the possibility of growth ahead of us.
Ooh, okay, so this is super juicy. What are the moves? What are the moves we need to
I
make?
know. I know. Um, the first move a resilient person will make is they'll face reality. They'll feel what they feel, they'll think what they think, they'll fall apart in the ways they fall apart, and they won't deny what's happening. That sounds so simple, but it's so important because how often we sort of push away the experience, push away the pain, push away the diagnosis or the ache and a resilient person will face it and feel what they feel and think what they think. And then the second move is very much often what is already working. Like, what do I know stabilizes me and also gives me energy? And they'll pivot to those choices. So, if meditation or exercise or, really focusing on your diet or calling a friend, if those are go to moves for you that work, you want to do more of those. And the third thing they'll do is they'll look for the helpers. They will not try to navigate this alone. There was a misunderstanding when I was growing up in the 70s that resilience looked very much like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and standing tall and not sharing your pain. And that's actually not a resilient stance at all.
Excuse the interruption, Lyssa here. I would like to ask something from you. If you like this channel and you like the content that I'm offering, please do a simple, easy thing for me, which is subscribe to the channel. And on that note, let's get back to the show. Yeah, I think it's an interesting narrative that we've grown up with in some ways, this sort of like John Wayne idea of like,
Right.
I can do it myself. I don't need anybody. And yet we're so interwoven. I mean, we're a social species. We're so interwoven with the need to have community, and you think about how lonely people are, and yet there's a community available to them if they just reach out. Often there's something close in that sense of you do not need to do this yourself, and in fact you do it better with others.
Tal Ben-Shahar has this expression that I've 1,000% stolen and used a million times, which is, we could borrow a better brain. So, for example, if I'm distraught, if I can't think clearly, if I have no idea what to do next, if I feel completely out of my body, like I'm so disoriented, those are the perfect times to borrow a better brain. And those better brains, are available to us often, even when we don't feel as if we have anyone particularly close we can lean on. The better brains are available through, Google, through read literature, through fiction even. I mean, I can't tell you how often a novel has reminded me of, oh, this is a choice that I could make. Um, but also through help, through therapy and counseling and coaching and social work and so on. So this idea that we don't have to suffer alone, and that actually growth kind of demands that we bring people in to help navigate the moment, is a very powerful and important one. There
Well,
really is,
one,
there really is no long-standing. I think this is true. There really is no long-standing resilience by oneself.
and I think that's crucially important to say. So let's say it again. There, if I'm hearing you correctly, there is no long-standing resilience without others.
Right.
And it kind of reminds me, for years I did relationship work, and I think there's a lot of work in relationships we can do on our own. Like, what is it that I'm reacting and responding to and all that, so I can maybe throttle back and not be a crazy wackadoodle in my relationship or whatever. But I think that we're wounded through relationship, and I think that the only way to heal the wounds is also through the conduit of relationships. Until you can actually take it theoretically into practice, how do you heal? And I think that's really kind of what I'm hearing is we're talking about this idea of resilience. Like, how do we heal and become more resilient if we try to do it in a silo?
Not only do others offer some wisdom, advice, guidance, help, I'm thinking now of Dr. Lucy Hone in New Zealand, who is a resilience expert and then had a tragic loss of her teenage daughter in a car accident at the age of 16. And she has a beautiful TED talk about the three things resilient folk do. And one of the things that she has lived in so clearly, so powerfully is, to ask yourself, to check in, does this help or does this harm me? Right? Whatever it is. And where that often gets sticky is when we're trying to recover ourselves or move forward ourselves, and other people have expectations of us. Come out of the house. It's time. It's time. You need
It's time.
to, right. And does that help or harm? Does this being with this person help or harm? And when we can clarify who really is there to support us, or what pockets of wisdom are really available to us, it saves us a tremendous amount of energy, and it saves us from layering in pain, suffering on top of our pain. It's bad enough our hearts are broken, and now I have to feel guilty because I'm not ready to go shopping with that group of friends, and they feel like I should be ready, but I don't feel ready yet. Right? So now we've layered in guilt and disappointment and regret and thousand ways to make things harder, but some very clear ways to make things better, in the sense of standing steady in what serves us in healthful ways.
Yeah. And I'm really struck also by thinking, because I think there is this sense of, I'm not experiencing your grief, right? Like you're experiencing whatever your grief is, and I'm maybe the observer of it. And if I love and care about you, I think there's maybe a human desire to have you be better, right? Like I want that for you. And yet, how that everybody grieves in their own speed and in their own manner and in the way that is necessary for them, and they may need to scream for a while, right? Before they're ready to move into a different space where they're getting some sort of other experience. They need to feel what they feel before they ask for more help. And I'm thinking about people in the helping professions, and we're working with people, and maybe we're working with people, and grief isn't really where our I don't know, it isn't our bailiwick, so it isn't necessarily where we're constant, like we've been trained the most. And yet we have a relationship with this person. What might a coach or a therapist or another person in the helping fields really need to understand about creating a safe space for a person who may be going through, whether it is the loss of a child, which is, I can't even imagine, or the loss of a job, which I can't imagine.
Yeah. I think, first to understand that the goal is no longer to resolve or complete or move through grief. The goal is to really integrate it. So whatever the suffering is, whether it's the suffering to one's identity, if a job is taken away from you, or the suffering of one's, economic stability, or the loss of a friend, or a sudden um, terror that's entered your body because of a diagnosis, to understand that the goal is to become slightly larger than that over time, to have it integrated and woven in, not resolved, not completed, not fixed, not checked off, but to have it integrated. and and that people's pathway to that, each pathway is unique. As therapists, counselors, coaches, we have certain red flags in mind that we're looking out for, right? That the person doesn't want to cause harm to themselves or others, for example. But short of those red flags, there are 1,000 ways back to an integrated, healthy, coherent life, and to really appreciate and respect the person's uniqueness and their desire to move forward, and their desire to also be respectful of themselves and their own process. I'm thinking now of a family who lost a teenage girl, and one of the younger siblings, pretty much within a week after the funeral, was ready to go back to school, back to social activities, back to, mommy, I'm going to sign up for this, do this, da, da, da. And the other sibling couldn't get out of bed. And neither one of them was in denial. And they had very different personalities and very different needs. And it took, I spoke with the mother a few years later, and she said it took about 2 or 3 years for the more introverted one to enter really back into life, and for the extroverted one to slow down enough to feel the grief. But they both eventually got to this place where they could talk about it and honor their sister and have it be integrated, but very different journeys.
Yeah. And I mean, I know from the work that I've done in trauma, I mean, like I've done a lot of part work. And so the idea of integration, I understand it as sort of, how do we have these dissociative parts coming together? When you say integration through the lens of this, this healing through and finding of resilience, what do you mean by integration?
So let me just step back for a second. Imagine you get that terrible phone call, someone you love has just died, an accident. Everything shatters. The present moment falls apart. Your sense of relationships in the world is now different. The expected future doesn't add up anymore. How you're going to spend your next immediate few weeks or months is now, up for question. And then the meaning of life, the meaning that you have imbued your life with, is now sort of scattered in the wind. It all has to be recohered, and that takes time. The integration that I'm talking about is not like, okay, I've got all the pieces and parts and I've named them and I've labeled them and I can talk to each and every one of them. That is one frame of integration. What I'm speaking about is that over time, I've learned enough about what happened to me and what it means and how I make sense of myself in the world so that I can move forward in life with the scars, with the wounds, and they can still affect me. I can still feel for in my own life the scorching heat of the loss of my brother from a number of years ago. And I am more than that. I'm a little bigger than the pain itself or than that particular loss itself. It's a kind of integration of I would call it a kind of wisdom, that I'll know, for example, that some days still to this day, my brother died in 2011. Some days still are impossible. They're impossible. I'm not I'm not having any podcast conversations. I'm not going out shopping. I'm not, I just need my blanket and my tea and I'm going to be by myself today, right? And the wisdom to know that that's part of the process and the journey of loving and living and moving forward also sometimes looks very much like crawling into bed, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's the kind of the knowing of oneself and what one needs in and not putting on the facade, but rather honoring the space that you find yourself and doing the things that actually support your healing and the journey. And also, I mean, with grief, it's so funny, but I mean, I think sometimes people are like, oh, I've grieved, I should be over it now. And it's like, I think we forget that it's like waves or tides and that it comes back in different levels of intensity or honestly within different ebb and flow for every single human being, and also depending just on where we are in our lives as well.
Yeah. And to remember too that sometimes, what can be so disorienting, even if the loss is not personal to you. So, people who work in systems, for example, companies, teams, athletic teams, and someone else experiences a profound loss. But now suddenly you realize, oh my God, that is now part of the picture of my life. And that is now possible in my world, right? So, you had illness come to you early on when you were 12 years old. Some people don't have that happen until much later in life. Um, I'm thinking now of an organization that I've been asked to consult with where there was a sudden tragic loss of a young person. And some of the parents in the organization are now aware, oh my God, it's not just me I have to think about. It's the fact that I can't protect my 12-year-old from everything,
Right.
right? And so that secondary awareness of what's possible also can cause enough disruption that you feel like I have to make sense of life all over again. And post-traumatic growth, there are the research demonstrates that there are sort of 5 evidences of growth over time. One has to do with increasing wisdom and clarity in the relational field, like knowing who to hang with and who not to, but also a deepening connection to oneself. A second evidence is shifts in spirituality, which we think of in a grand sense of, shifts in the sense of being connected to something larger, like I'm connected to life again, or I'm connected to love or to kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Third could be the evidence of, like you said, an increased appreciation of the preciousness of life, right? And fourth is, and this is such an interesting one to see when people sort of go through hell and they're integrating that in and they've come to know more about themselves. Sometimes what happens is they feel like the doors over here just opened. Like I would never have taken that risk before, but what the heck?
Mm.
I've already been through hell. Why not say yes to that? Right. So that an increased sense of opportunity in life. And then the fifth area has to do with this sense of sort of standing up within oneself, an increased self regard, sense of one's strength, sense of one's control, inner control. I'm thinking now of a number of breast cancer survivors I know who've said, I didn't think I'd be able to make it through. And honey, I am stronger than ever, like,
Yeah.
right. That, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so good because I think, I mean, I love that also, that idea too. It's kind of like if you're going through hell, keep going. I think that was Winston Churchill, right? But it's also the fact that you went through it. You get out the other side with a recognition of I made it through here. The possibilities are endless as to what I could do. I'm sort of having all these little moments of like putting connections together with the story of my childhood and how that actually in some ways has led to the person I've become. And I just really am appreciating that as I'm listening to you. So thank you for this. It feels a little like I'm getting some good coaching. Um,
And you actually just did something beautiful that I often encourage people to do, which is to look back at the past, not simply through the lens of what happened, but to actually look back and notice one's resilient choices along the way. That, oh, there was that terrible time in college, and that was when I first learned, to lean on a mentor, or there was that loss of a friend when I was 12 years old. And that's when I learned that, Tuesday is just as precious as any other day. Like Tuesday matters and Wednesday matters and Thursday. So to look back and notice the wise choices, that life-giving choices that you've made along the way, to remind yourself that is still all available to me, even in the presence of the onslaught that's come to me now.
Yeah. And I think it also, because I mean, when we're thinking about this idea of how we interact in times of difficulty, and I think it's fair to say that we live, I think every generation feels like they live in difficult times, but I would say that this feels more of a challenging time in some ways with all the things happening around the world kind of all at once and the inundation of all the information that we get about it. Whereas, it might have all been going on in the 70s. We just only knew about a small part of it. And so we weren't quite so overwhelmed with I don't know, the influx of all the bad things happening around the world. So to be able to take our capacity for growth and be able then to hold all that's happening, how I'm not exactly sure even what the question is, but I'm just sort of left with like, how do we support ourselves with what I hear being really grace and compassion, self-compassion for ourselves, self-compassion for all the, or compassion for the world, but also to not allow ourselves to just be broken. And before you answer that, we had that other conversation which I really loved, and the visual that really came out of it for me was when you were talking about the um, the 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 Japanese
Mm.
um, I'm going to say it wrong,
Kintsugi.
Kintsugi, and just that sense of like how do we put the gold in our cracks and heal oneself.
Yeah. So you're speaking about a metaphor that I use, that was an art form that emerged in Japan in the 15th century, which is a bowl that's been broken and now lined in the fractured places with gold lacquer. And that our resilient choices are like lining those fractured fault lines with gold so that we can hold the whole together again and appreciate now the beauty of this integrated piece that is both broken and whole at the same time, right? Um, to answer your question about how do we do this in a time as complicated as this, I want to talk about time for a second. So when when we're in a relatively low stress time, you'll see that resilient folk are looking out. They're looking toward the future. How can I take advantage of this moment in such a way that it builds forward, right? But in a time of high stress or real um, complication and difficulty and confusion, which I would say is for most of us now, we want to take the lens of time and shrink it so that we really start standing much more consciously in the day. So
Mm.
what is the thing that will serve me today? What is the life-giving choice today? Do I need to calm myself down in some way? Or do I need to build up my sense of strength in some way? Or do I need vitality, energy, more of sort of juice in the system, if you will? Those are kind of the three pathways of resilient strategies: calming oneself down, strengthening oneself, and or energizing oneself. And we can develop I like to offer people a monthly, a 30-day practice of waking up in the morning and saying, what is one thing I can do today in one of those pathways? And you'll find that, today might be the day you really need to calm yourself down, but tomorrow you're ready for some energy. You're ready for something new, something interesting, something exciting. You're ready to go, get back out on the pickleball court, or learn a new art skill, or take a risk and go to a poetry reading and writing workshop, even though you've never written a line of poetry before.
Yeah. Hula hooping. That's what I've been doing lately.
Hula hooping, right? There you go.
And it makes me laugh. So there you go,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's part of it also. It's like as soon as you can start to access your creativity and your humor, it's also probably a good indicator of working towards healing. It,
Yeah. Nick Cave, I don't know if you've seen his work recently. He's a famous musician from Australia, punk rocker in his early years, and then along the journey of his life has lost two sons, and he now is um, doing a lot of speaking and writing and singing, having integrated these losses, or working to integrate these losses. And he had a beautiful moment on the Stephen Colbert show recently where he read a letter from a father from another country, saying, how do I live in this world and teach my son when I feel despairing, you know? And Nick Cave said, any act you do, such as reading to your son at night, letting him know what you love, holding him close, taking him out for a walk, is a redemptive act, right? And his wisdom, that's sort of an intuitive wisdom, but it's right in alignment with the research that resilient folk take the day and they shape it in a direction that serves them.
Excuse the quick interruption, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that you were invited to my monthly coaches Q&A. It happens every third Monday of the month, and we talk about all things coaching. We talk about coaching demos, we talk about competencies, we talk about what to do with resistant clients, we talk about all sorts of things. Plus, we have an added networking event at the end of it. So you are invited to join this community. I would love to see you there. And on that note, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah, and I mean, I love that story, but also the sense of you have power over this moment. And you said something earlier about just even reading a novel can sometimes give us ways of thinking about life differently. There was a novel, I love science fiction, but it was a science fiction novel, and one of the lines in the novel was the difference between a hero and a victim is the mood they're in when circumstances take a turn for the worst and require action. And it wasn't, I don't know that he wrote it exactly like that, but that line has served me my entire
Mm,
life since I read it.
mm.
And I think it becomes, to your point, what is my choice in this moment? You're smiling. What just showed up for you?
Well, I'm a huge science fiction fan.
I knew it. We're
Got Station 11 on, right, on record. I've got every Ender's Game, the whole series, Orson Scott Card, Lord Fowl's Bane.
have you well, that was an Orson Scott Card novel that I was quoting from too.
So and fiction, I'm just lost in thought, because there's a beautiful story by Kate DiCamillo, who wrote Because of Winn-Dixie. So multiple award winning um, writer for I think the 8 to 12-year-old age range in particular. And an aspiring young children's novelist wrote to Kate and said, what is our job when we're writing to young ones? Is it to tell them the truth or to protect them from the truth? And Kate, in her answer, responds by saying she had a best friend who read Charlotte's Web over and over and over again. She'd finish the book, close it, and then start again. And as an adult, she finally asked her friend, why would you read that book, back to front, back to front, back to front, over and over again? Did you think that one day Charlotte wasn't going to die? The spider wasn't going to die? And because that's the horrible thing of Charlotte's Web, is that the pig loses his best friend. She dies, right? And her friend said, oh no, it wasn't that I thought I knew she was going to die. It's that it was teaching me that that it was okay. I could handle it. And Kate then writes back to this aspiring author saying, our job is to tell children the truth and show them the way to handle it. And I think
which is
that's
a crucial distinction.
a crucial distinction, right? Do we want to protect some innocence in children and some innocence even in ourselves? Yes. Do we want to protect that at the cost of pretending that life is easier or more beautiful or more beneficent than it actually is? No, because there's a great cost to denial, which is that we don't then develop the strengths and the wisdom to know how to move forward and to know how to bring others with us.
You know, I am a dog lover. I am an animal lover. Honestly, I've had cats and dogs and fish and birds. I've, lived the zoology experience in my house. And and I think one of the things people sometimes say, I don't want any more animals. It's too painful to lose them. And I've honestly always felt like I feel like it is so much more important for me to have that relationship than to be afraid of the loss of that relationship.
Yeah.
And what it teaches me about, again, going back to the appreciation of the moment. So when my dog is being a total knucklehead, I'm remembering in that moment that I adore them. They're a knucklehead. They won't be a knucklehead forever. And this is a moment in life that I'm experiencing
Right.
in relationship with them. And so I don't want to never have that again just because the end of their lives is shorter than mine, God willing, and that I'm going to be sad and I'm going to be heartbroken and I'll survive it and I will love again. And I think that's that sense also of, you know, I, I don't know how big the human heart is and its capacity to love, but I think it's quite immense to quote piglet on some level,
Yeah.
right?
Right. I think it was Zelda Fitzgerald who actually said no one has ever yet been able to measure the capacity of the human heart. And I do want to say this, however, with complete respect. I do know that there are circumstances in life that will bring any one of us to a place of such shattering that it may not feel possible to love again in that way or to love fully again in that way. Um, and I there is a kind of grace that I would love for each of us to be able to offer to ourselves and to others who are in that position, because I, so much of life is tricky and complicated, and so much of what happens to us triggers what happened to us before in ways that can make it very, 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 very challenging. So permission to grow, permission to strengthen, permission to move forward, permission to become wiser, permission to learn and study resilience and seek help, those better brains. And also, I love to remind people permission to have it take as long as it takes.
Yes.
And there are some things that Lyssa, some things I don't think I'm going to fully integrate in this lifetime. I don't, they're a little tricky and they're big, and I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, I appreciate the grace of that and the permission to choose for yourself where you need to be at the moment you find yourself. It isn't, there's no judgment. I just know for myself
Right.
that's a truth for me, but that doesn't mean on any level that that is anybody else's truth. And I think there's that sense also of, and I think this is where we can sometimes get in trouble, where we want people to heal faster than they need to, or try and get them out of feeling bad about stuff, is that we're all walking in our own journey, and it's not my job to judge anybody else's journey. It's my job to walk my own. And that's really what I'm hearing from you as you share this.
I did this exercise recently. I was working with a cohort of therapists, social workers, counselors, and so on, and people in the medical field. And I asked them to do a life map of and to chunk their life into eras, and in each era, answer some questions like who was listening, who helped, what did you learn, what was meaningful then, and so on. And so they had all this information. And then I asked them to step back and say, okay, looking at your life map or this life map, imagine now that this is a story and that the person whose life map you drawn is the protagonist or the hero of the story. What does the hero need now? Now, they had all answered the exact same questions. They had all been asked to look at their lives in the exact same frame. But what the hero of every single story needed now was totally different, totally different. And I use that as a device to have them then step back and realize, well, their clients would, if they had 20 clients in the room, they'd all have a different story answer too. And so resilience isn't about some of the misunderstanding, certainly about resilience and about positive psychology, is that it's about being stronger and wiser and happier and more filled with meaning in every moment. No, it actually looks very much, kind of like a squiggly mess, except that there are, over time, there are some things that we keep pulling forward into the next squiggly mess that we know we can rely on, both internally and hopefully externally as well. But what you need in any one moment is going to feel very different, life to life, person to person, and day to day.
Yeah, and even moment to moment, like what I needed yesterday and what I need now may be very different depending on just where I am in the
Right.
cycle. And it really does also. I mean, I think about positive psychology and how there's been all this around toxic positivity. And I think what you're speaking to is this sort of the simplistic idea of positive psychology, that it's going to be like kumbaya all the time and we're just going to roll with everything that gets tossed at us in some sort of, I don't know, whatever perfect way is that we would be responding to things, and not seeing and appreciating the messiness of it and the uniqueness of the journey. I mean, people must come to you sometimes and say, toxic positivity, toxic positivity. I mean, what is your sense of like what even leads that to that idea of that people have about
Yeah.
positivity in such a way?
Yeah, I think it's just a misunderstanding of the heart of the field. The heart of the science of positive psychology is to help us understand what health and thriving and growth and resilience actually look and feel like in real human beings. And somehow that all got connected to happierness, to and it's the study of happiness. Well, happiness is a is a thread, absolutely, as is strength, as is meaning, as is resilience, right? There are different threads under the umbrella of positive psychology. So I think it's just it's a newspaper headline kind of misunderstanding, if you will, or a tweet. Do we say tweet anymore? Is it
I
Twitter?
don't know.
Right. Um,
I do. I was just because, but I'm never on Twitter or
right.
X or whatever it's called.
Whatever it is now, right. Neither am I, clearly. But I do, in our culture too, there is a seduction, right? The seductive, one of the seductive stories of America is that there's an American dream that will make us all happy. And that somehow we'll all find our way into that dream. And we know that that just isn't true. And we also know that we can recalibrate what's meaningful to us. And that's
Mhm.
part of the journey of post traumatic growth. Um, it may have been tremendously meaningful to serve in the armed forces at one time, but now you've experienced war, you've come back home, you have these symptoms. The band of brothers or the band of sisters and brothers that you were with no longer exists in the same way anymore. You're back home in a county that doesn't know what to do with you. Everything has changed, right? And to suggest to someone in that moment that they should be seeking happiness will feel so disrespectful, and
Yeah.
also so misunderstanding of what the real opportunity is. And the real opportunity there is, can I honor what I know, what I've seen, what I'm carrying forward with me? Can I honor and respect that and make choices that sustain my life?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely well, my husband was in the military for 22 years, and then and I come from a military family, and it just sort of strikes me. And then I worked for the military, for the Air Force for years, and so there's this sense of, again, kind of going back to that whole John Wayne idea of I should be able to do this all by myself. And added on to that is this polarity of like sad, the you must move to happy, versus maybe I'm just moving to sustaining myself. Maybe it's just like I'm moving to I'm okay, I'm alive, and I'm okay in this moment, just this one moment. And we just work on maybe developing those moments, but that it isn't about this like this huge pendulum swing all the way over to bright happy people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And um, I'm thinking now in 1970 something, I had this big yellow happy smiley face circle on my bedroom wall. It was so popular back then. The hippie yellow. Can you see it with the
I
black?
can totally see it in my head.
I stared at that thing every morning, and then at one point as a teenager, I woke up and I was like, "I'm not happy. Why do I have this in my room? Like, I'm just not happy. Like, this is not me." Um, and even that, even being able to respect oneself enough to say, "This is not who I am," and me as the hero of my own story, I need something else right now. Maybe I need to be quiet. Maybe I need respect. Maybe I need compassion. Maybe I need respite. You mentioned early on the book I've recently written about, how appreciation of beauty, both natural beauty and moral beauty, goodness, as well as the beauty of excellence, can be sustaining for us. And that arose out of a true burnout after the first 9 months of the pandemic, where I literally didn't want to get out of bed. I just wanted to watch Game of Thrones start to finish over and over again. Me and Jon Snow. That's all I want. Um, and I realized that I was just beyond bone tired, fatigued, and I needed sustenance. And so I began a January 1st, 2021 practice of looking for beauty for just a moment every single day. And that became incredibly sustaining and reminded me of the research around the character strength that is available to us, to the capacity to savor beauty and be inspired by it.
You said three forms of beauty, beauty in nature and in life, but there was also an excellence, and there was
So the beauty of excellence, so appreciating the excellence of achievement and accomplishment, like Michelangelo, for example, or like Lionel Messi, or Mia Hamm, or Celine Dion's voice, right? Excellence. Um, and we know that appreciating natural beauty provides often respite, physiological calm, optimism, a sense of peacefulness within and without, and a connectedness, a sense of connectedness. And appreciation of excellence often is motivating. It triggers within us this desire to move forward with our own passions, our own dreams, our own, if he could do that, maybe I can do this kind of thing, right? And then the third pathway of beauty is moral beauty or goodness. And that is often what triggers within us that sense of, how might I become a better person in the presence of this person's goodness? So when we witness generosity or ordinary heroism or kindness or um, compassion, it can inspire us to bring more of those alive within ourselves while appreciating it in them, right? And so appreciation of beauty isn't passive, it's generative. It actually generates more of the same. So the more I am attuned to goodness in the world, the more likely I am to bring goodness forward and to share it with others.
yeah, it's the pay it forward in some ways.
Exactly. And that's the generous exchange. And if we can do that with the planet, if I can be more attuned to how that my very livelihood depends on the ecosystem of plants and trees. Right. Well, let's just start there with oxygen. Let's just
Let's
start,
do that.
right?
Let's just
Like, I can
and
be
be in full
doing it.
agreement
I'm
that
just,
we all depend on oxygen.
yeah. Like, so it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in a major, metropolitan city, that oxygen still is dependent on the green spaces somewhere. So if I
Just saying.
if I can bring that to my awareness and savor it, I'm more likely to be protective of trees, plants, shrubs, grasses, right? I'm more likely to move toward protecting them because we protect what we find beautiful. We protect what we're inspired by, right? If I appreciate the unconditional love of the dog kingdom, for example, and what they show us over and over again about loyalty and perseverance and just generosity, if I can appreciate that and really take that in, I am more likely to bring more of that alive to my next conversation, my next moment, my next relationship.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
And
the full-bodied enthusiasm that my dogs
yeah,
demonstrate,
the zest of the dog, right? Yeah, right. The passion, the exuberance. Um, and here's what becomes fascinating. We'll go back to your earlier question about how do we do this in a time of despair, right? You would think beauty would be so far down the list. We need to fight. We need to stand strong. We need to, all of those things true. But we also need sources within ourselves that remind us of the why of living. Why bother living when evil is present? Well, because beauty is present also. Why bother fighting the good fight if a dictator is running your country or your state? Well, because kindness is present also, right? And so it not only rests us and provides respite, it actually motivates us to get out of bed and do whatever we can to contribute.
Yeah. And we need people to get out of bed and contribute
Yeah.
to beauty and kindness and empathy. It's interesting too. I was reading an article on sort of the backlash on empathy lately, and I'm curious if have you read any of sort of these articles on people like empathy is this problem that we shouldn't be empathetic. People shouldn't be empathetic. And I find that so striking because how else do we allow ourselves to stand in the shoes of another human being? Not that we know, like, not that if I put myself in your shoes based on the story you've told, and it doesn't mean I fully 100% understand your story or have had your experience, but I can empathize with your struggle if I can at least put myself in a position of where I had something that was as devastating for me as this is devastating for you, or as joyful as for me as it is joyful for you. Like empathy works in both directions. It's not just for sadness, it's for about appreciation of the
Yeah.
whole spectrum of humanity.
So I'm not a historian, but I'm fascinated by moments where the impossible seemingly happened, like the Berlin Wall came down, like the struggles in Ireland ended, right? Like apartheid ended, right? And if you read a little bit about what enabled those movements, there were large forces at play that had to be in place at the exact same time. But all of them rest also on the ability for someone who was on this side of the wall to actually have a sense of what it was like to be someone on this side of the wall, and that
Mhm.
they cared enough, as painful as the dialogue was. I mean, Mandela writing to de Klerk for 27 years, right? As painful it was, they cared enough to get into dialogue. So all the major positive shifts historically have required empathy. So when people talk about that, I don't know what they're thinking. I
Yeah.
just don't. So I don't read about it.
Well, I just recently was reading about it only because it came up in, I don't know, the New York Times, and I was looking at the New York Times before I played Wordle. But I was thinking also as you're talking, like the Indian Revolution with Gandhi. I mean, we think about Gandhi, but we forget that it was 100 years. It took 100 years for for India to have its own sovereignty again. And I think there's also a perseverance that is required along with that empathy and that willingness to understand or acknowledge a different perspective. And I think that's a bit of it also. I mean, part of how we, in my mind at any rate, part of how we get to these sort of like my position alone and not hearing anything of your position is this lack of seeing that I'm only one position. I've only got one perspective, and that there are a myriad of potential perspectives going back to how we respond and react to the things that happen to us, and that there isn't one right one. There's just a bunch of them. So, how do we, I don't know, allow for
Right.
there to be more than just mine?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm kind of, I'm looking at a couple other questions that I wanted to ask you for leaders. And I know you work with leaders as well as with therapists and coaches and students, of your work. What is a perspective shift that might be useful for them as they're doing the work that they do? I think you've talked about it in some form or other, but just
I think there are two pathways that I like to check in on or make available to leaders. One is, how can I help you or how can we help you sustain um, a sense of grounded optimism, right? So to not get lost or trapped in fear and catastrophizing and taking things personally and jumping to conclusions, but to have a steady stream of grounded optimism really connected to reality, not fantasy optimism. That's one. And the second is to check in on the story that many leaders tell themselves and are experiencing, which is that they feel alone, right? Either that alone in the sense of no one else knows how big this burden is, no one else can share this burden with me, or alone in the sense of um, if I don't do it, no, it's never going to get done well or never going to get done, or alone in the sense of um, I'm supposed to be super strong all the time. And if I let people know how vulnerable I actually feel, they won't follow me. And so therefore I'm alone and I have to wall myself off. So there are a number of varieties of that. I'm in this on my own belief. And I like to help sort of explore that and break that open by not only doing the obvious work of, well, who actually is here for you now and here with you now? So let's just get real about that, that you may be literally less alone than you think you are.
like literally less
Less
alone.
alone. But also I'll have them look back at the past and say, okay, in those eras of time when you were leading, who was listening? Who was helping? Who was mentoring you? And they're often surprised that they can come up with one or two names for each era. Like, it's interesting that in every era of your life, someone was listening, someone was following, someone was helping. How is it that that doesn't feel that way now? So what's the barrier to that, right? So those are the two pathways that I really love to explore with them: grounded optimism and breaking down that sense of isolation. And it doesn't usually mean that they suddenly feel like, oh, I can tell everybody about all my problems or all my worries or fears. It's what starts to happen, and here's the beautiful paradox of this work, is they start to feel more connected to themselves and more compassion for the moment. And from that, they tend to be more available to the actual relationships that are possible in front of them.
Yeah, it doesn't mean telling your competition all your fears, but to be able to resource yourself from your world.
Yeah. And we do need kin in the sense of, if I'm the only female C-suite executive in a trucking company industry, it would be helpful to meet another female C-suite executive in a male-dominated niche, right? I mean, that
Mhm.
would be helpful. We need kin.
Yeah.
who can share a certain language and understanding. And sometimes we have to look far and wide for them.
Yeah.
But I do think one of the resilient strategies I can offer is to help them really nuance and pick apart their belief about being so alone, and see what is available to them and what has been available to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like group, right? Like you're in a group of people who are working on empowerment or we're working on grief, but you're not alone. And so there's that support system, that resourcing that I'm not alone. And it's always amazing how other people resolve the things that they're dealing with and how they handle it, and how even hearing about that can help us think about how we're going to deal with our own situations and maybe give us new insights or ways of thinking about it. Yeah. Um, I have a couple of questions left, but I'm curious if, well, a couple of things. One, is there something that you once thought about resilience that you now think about completely differently as a result of your work?
Definitely the difference between the sense that some people are resilient and some people aren't. That was an old belief system. And now really the understanding, that most of us are resilient most of the time, and we can often use a little more wisdom and understanding about what that actually looks and feels like. Because I may be super good at handling, I don't know, you know, a downturn in the economy, but I may not be good at all if my best friend betrays me. Right. So, I mean, so different assaults will require just sort of different responses. And um, that's one. The other misunderstanding I had about resilience is that I used to believe that resilience looked like stoicism.
Mm,
That no one knows how deep your pain is. You you figure it out yourself. You don't burden anybody with your vulnerability. And it turns out that's not a resilient strategy at all. It may temporarily help you feel strong, but it doesn't actually sustain your growth.
I don't know who I was talking to recently, but we were talking about the need for vulnerability in order to actually create intimacy. Like if you can't be vulnerable, if you can't be courageous enough to be, you know, like be I don't know, transparent's maybe not exactly the right word, but that ability to be vulnerable and not perfect and not have to think of yourself as a silo, that you can't truly have intimacy in your life. And without the intimacy, um, it goes back to the loneliness, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, and here's where the beautiful work of Brene Brown has been so important in helping us understand that vulnerability is actually a pathway to intimacy, to courage, to achieving your dreams, to passion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. I have a tradition on this podcast, and I stole it from another podcast, but I loved it so much that you know I started doing it myself, and it is to ask a guest, a prior guest, to ask a question of a future guest, and then ask you the question that was left for you. So it is the question that was left for you is, what is something you yearn to have in your life right now?
Ah, I yearn to have in my life right now hope. Hope. Yeah.
Oh, Maria, thank you so much for being on the coaching studio and sharing your beautiful self with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lyssa.